Hi, and welcome to this week's trade newsletter. This week we're going to be covering US tariffs, UK trade pressure, AI and customs, cost exposure, and growth markets. Covering a lot of things like geopolitics, freight, compliance, and supply chains. So let's see what's happened in the last week. As you can see, we're seeing some signals around trade routes under pressure. So energy risk, as we've known, oil and fuel volatility. We're certainly seeing that. We're seeing a bit of freight exposure, route disruption, insurance pressures may increase landing costs, and delivery uncertainty and price volatility. They're the key things we're looking for. Supply chain decisions, business continue reviewing. So we're seeing a lot more reviewing, concentrating supply dependency and resilience planning. Why do exporters and why should they care? Well, geopolitical pressure puts lots of landing cost issues, pricing strategy, customer margins, and delivery reliability. So again, it's very important. Supply chains no longer move faster than risk. Risk now is the fundamental part. Somebody talked to me recently about just in time, and we was talking about this and saying, just in time doesn't really exist anymore in today's political and geopolitical rules around, lots of delays around there. So it's more and more planning as we're seeing. What we're seeing on the freight market snapshot, again, freight intelligence, what's it saying? Shanghai to UK, Europe around $2,200 to $3,100. Direction stable, slight upward pressure. Red Sea disruption insurance remains factors. India, UK, approximately around $19,000 to $2,700. Improving going sourcing activity and diversification. Saudi, UK, approximately around 16 to 23. Direction stable. Saudi, obviously, the vision. And we're seeing a big shift to the supporting industrial and infrastructure demand. US, UK, around 14 to 2001, direction volatile, policy and tariff shifts influencing flows. So again, we're seeing a few shifts there. China, Europe, and air freight, around $4 to $7 per kilo. Direction elevated capacity remains sensitive. Again, why does this matter? Well, it has a huge thing on your landing costs, your inventory planning, your delivery performance, international profitability, and margin protection. Why should exporters care? Even though we've mentioned a lot on imports here, we're talking about mainly for your cost coming in for your raw material. And that makes it a huge difference because obviously your costs are going up as a manufacturer. A lot of challenges there. If you're just a wholesaler, you're bringing goods in. Again, there's a lot of pressure there. That cost of rising, and how do you control that cost when it's rising? Do you implement it within your system? Do you not pass it on, or do you pass on? So it's volatile, as we've seen. Supply chain exposure watch, trade route exposure. Again, we're seeing them energy commodities and geopolitical tension. Is it settling down? Well, it's been a bit quiet, hasn't it? But again, not a lot of things have been happening. Always moves when things go a little bit quiet. Supply dependency, heavy reliance on single country sourcing. What we said, and what we're seeing in the market is that we've relied heavily on one source. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is now with geopolitics and everything around there, it causes many challenges because if one supplier doesn't fit, how do you start to move? So we're seeing a much more bigger shift. And if one of the podcasts we've done is the China plus one. And what I mean by that is that, it's looking for new opportunities. China's not going to change. I mean, don't undervalue or think that China is going to suddenly dissipate. No, it's still going to be a powerhouse. But things are just changing slightly. So as a buyer of your raw material, there's a lot of things that are shifting. So again, it's just things to be aware of. Again, supply chain exposure increasingly affects delivery reliability, planning, customer confidence, and profitability. It's the businesses reviewing exposure for disruption recover faster because they're already ahead of the game. They're seeing it. They're not just relying on different areas. So what do we see in the UK Trade and Customs Watch? UK trade prompts imports has been all continue outpacing exports. Pressure remains on manufacturing. Again, government needs to support exporters in some way. I don't know what they're going to do. It's just, we need government who can understand the opportunities that the UK could have. It's not always got, but it could have. And stop just, we see it all the time that, these large companies doing very well. The SMEs are for me, the bedrock. They're the kind of companies that need support. They're the companies that need support from UK governments. That will then hopefully give us a big push on our exports. Obviously, documentation, customs, and all these key areas. But this is what the channel's for. It's there to help businesses. Growth markets increasingly explore Gulf, Asia, and emerging markets to diversify, again, giving you opportunities. Customers and origin, that's not going away. We're still seeing that origin evidence. That won't go away. That'll be here. You know, it's something you don't think about until you have an audit exposure. I can be brutally honest with you. Most people don't even look at this, and then they suddenly have an audit, and it opens a can of worms. You have to be fully aware of your origin evidence, valuations, supply declarations, etc. It's very important to have your suppliers declarations so you know exactly where you're buying your products from. Freight and margin pressures, we're seeing pure operational efficiencies continuing to influence in landing costs and profitability. That's a real challenge, and it's always been a challenge in the freight market. It's volatile. Again, the strongest is increasing combined compliance, diversification, operational control. We certainly see that. Global signals, we just said the United States, obviously protection still remains active, supply chains continue adapting, exporters face changing cost structures. Again, don't underestimate that. There's opportunities there. The US do enjoy working with the UK. We've not helped ourselves recently, but there's nothing to stop the UK obviously expanding. We saw that in the last few months. There was an increase in the UK's exports. That won't change. So again, keep looking at the US. Don't be put off. The obviously sections and everything around there. Hopefully the visit of King Charles recently may have influenced a better trade deal. It's there, but what we're going to have going forward. Europe, we're seeing pressures on CBAM documentation, the usual. Saudi, that vision is there, the logistics infrastructure. I think there's a lot of opportunities in growth, but again, it's an interesting market, really, Saudi, and obviously working out there myself. I think there's a lot of opportunities for UK companies. The hardest bit, and including myself, is actually getting your foot in the door. That's the biggest challenge. It tends to be very hard to get into a market. It's different cultures, different marketplace. It's difficult to deal with not companies, but route to market support, because it's just, it never gets going. Training, you can be waiting 6 months for any reaction. So yeah, it's a challenging market. Asia still, I think, is a great opportunity, and I still think Africa is a big area as well for the UK. Things we should be looking at. Origin, again, like with origin evidence, weak supply declarations, unsupported. You've got to watch that. That will come back to bite you. Commodity classification, knowing your commodity code is very important. Don't assume the commodity code that you have is always the correct one. Always check it. Customs valuation, again, freight assist transfer pricing. So again, remember, everything has your freight, insurance, and transport. So when we look at it, CIF, carriage, insurance, and freight, it's always added into your valuation. So invoice value, CIF on top of there's your customs valuation. If you're doing intercompany and you transfer pricing, again, make sure it's within a reasonable price. Don't undervalue something. Again, most customs problems start before shipment. Strong controls protect margins long before claims. A lot of people fail here, and you could get this right. It's about investing some time in this, because ultimately this will be your way of entering markets and being a bit ahead of the game. It's very important to see that. Again, sustainability, CBAM and market access, CBAM exposure. We know that's going to have an impact. And again, that's a big challenge at the moment. We're not quite sure how it's going to turn out. It's just protection all day long, but at the end of the day, it's here, and we've got to live with it, and we're going to go along with it. Customer requirements, supply chain transparency, carbon reporting, ethical sourcing evidence, ESG procurement, screening large buyers, increasing access, supply beyond price law. So again, a lot of challenges we're seeing there. Again, you have to know, unfortunately, this is the world we live in, lower carbon and all these things. It doesn't matter what it costs you. If it could bankrupt you, governments, they don't care. But unfortunately, it's here, and you have to find a way of making it work for you. That's all I can say on that. AI data is here. We're seeing it very much in my business. Which market's your opportunity? Less and less people now come for sometimes advice. We're seeing they're probably using AI, and that's fine. That's what AI is probably there for. But remember, it doesn't give you the experience and the knowledge. It might give you a quick answer, but it might always not be the right answer. Sometimes you've got to understand what the answer is. So again, which market's your opportunity, which suppliers increase risk, which products face tariff pressure, which Incoterms. Yeah, AI can probably do a lot of this, but do you understand what it's giving you? AI is a tool to help you, so it's there to support your knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, it's not going to support you. So again, it's very important. risk identification, market monitoring, landing cost visibility, supply chain exposure. We spend a lot of time in AI, and it still doesn't always give you the correct answers. So, and we've been doing this for over 2 or 3 years, or probably longer. So you've got to learn and teach your system how you want it to respond, and that takes a lot of time and effort. Again, competitive advantage, obviously AI in trade is there to help you. It's not there to kind of affect your job, because AI is there as a tool. It's a data tool that will support you. Use it, use the advantage of it. Food and drink watch, consumer supply chains, food inflation pressures. So we're just, on here, we're starting to see some pressures there. UK food and drink exports continue supported by whisky, premium food products, dairy exports, gold market demand. Demand for trusted UK brands remains strong. Again, with the GCC agreement, hopefully we're going to see some good opportunities for British brand foods, which I think is great. Global sourcing and exposure food supply chains remain exposed, again, like everybody else. And that's a challenge. Again, retail margin pressure, business concern balances, supply cost level, inventory levels, consumer demand, margin protection. Again, it's, a lot of challenges there. UK demand signals, food consumption increase influenced by inflation, disposable income, consumer confidence. Again, there's confidence there. We don't see many when you're going in cities or anything. Restaurants are busy. Coffee shops are busy. Is there an opportunity to really expand the food and drink? I think there is. I think the food and drink are a backbone of exporting. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there. But obviously there's cost pressures and market exposure there. And there's also a bit of margin exposure. There's market confidence and future sourcing risk. Again, it's just making sure you've got all them demands and you're controlling everything. Market outlook, what we're doing on the smart, signal worth watching, areas likely to influence costs. Priorities we know, Middle East and Red Sea exposure, tariff and manufacturing policies, customer enforcement trends, Gulf diversification investment. Again, questions should we be asked? Could higher freight costs affect profitability? Are we over dependent in one market or supply? Have compliance processes been tested recently? Where is the hidden margin exposure? Are competitors adapting? AI can tell you anything you want, but it can't go into a business and do a full audit and save companies between 10 and 100,000. We do this regularly. We go into businesses and help them. We're not there to judge or anything. We're there to support them. And, I can tell you now, we find where there's money to be made or money being lost, which is actually a spend that they shouldn't be spending. So we never, ever come away from a company without some sort of saving. So yeah, use AI all you want, but also use the intelligence of people who know what they're looking for. Again, some global trade data snapshots. China export growth around 8 to 10%. Year-on-year selected manufacturing on EVs, machinery, electronics export competitive remains strong. Africa trade expansion. The AFTA expects to support a £450 billion potential income gains long term. Again, potential there with the US. Growth areas, manufacturing, agriculture region. Always look at where the trends are, because if you're a manufacturer, there's some good areas here. Germany, US trade approximately 150 billion in bilateral goods trade. In automotive, machinery, chemicals, tariff changes of main exposure. So again, a lot of challenges on Germany, especially with rising cost, particularly in gases and everything else around there, electricity and all the wholesale cost is really affecting their competitiveness. So again, some challenges there. Saudi, we're seeing non-oil economies. So again, logistics, infrastructure, and just Gulf demand remains an opportunity. That's what we're seeing. So again, China exports to Germany, US trade, African growth, Gulf diversification. We're seeing trade intelligence signal, trade growth. So again, we're seeing some opportunities, what we're looking at through the data. Again, our next history chat, we did the one on the Civil. Thanks for everybody who tuned in and watched it. Again, we're now looking this week at the ancient Roman trade and modern supply chains. It's incredible when you look back at history, Rome and what they were doing. And when we talk about, roads spanning, port infrastructure, taxation systems, customs duty, protection of trade routes, it's an incredible journey. So again, we'll be doing that this Sunday. Again, anybody who has a chance to watch the Silk Road, please jump in. But again, Rome understood something modern business still face: efficient infrastructure, secure trade routes, predictable taxation, economic growth, disruption, increased costs long before goods reach markets. Asian traders waited weeks or months for information. Modern business receive data instantly, but still fail with visibility is poor. So again, there's a lot of similarities, and we'll talk about that. It's really worth. Please join us on Sunday. A lot of work goes into it, a lot of research goes into it, and it's really interesting to see. Again, next 7 days, what we're looking at: US tariffs, Red Sea, EU CBAM, Saudi investment, AI infrastructure, currency fluctuations, capacity constraints. Again, some boardrooms where my hidden costs are supplies concentrated in one region. Would tariffs change immediately after any affect the margin? So what we're saying there, would, if a tariff was a change, would that affect duties and costs here? Have origin and customs code been tested, like we mentioned on Nielsen? And which markets show the strongest demand? Again, this is where using AI and data can really help you. We certainly see that. Again, thanks for watching. Again, subscribe if you can. That'd be lovely if you did. Again, there's lots of things on here just to show you, and just to show you our data success, sources used over the week. We use a lot of information, so it's all here. We're quite happy to show where we're getting that information from. We scour the markets to see what the trends are. Sometimes the trends stay very similar. You might notice that trends sometimes do stay. Export weekly trade combines publicity, available customs fair regularity with market monitoring. So we monitor that. We try and put it all together for you, what we're seeing in the market. And if it does have an update, a big change, we'll update you next week. So thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. It's also posted this, and you can get it on the post if you need it on the post. So again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week with the next week's trade update. Thanks for joining us, everybody.